This is Eric with Geo Creations.
I'm here today to talk about Sculpey modeling clay. Sculpey is a unique clay because, unlike most earth-based clays, this is a polymer or plastic-style oil-based clay. Because of this, it offers a few strengths. It's incredibly waterproof, never fully dries out, and can be cooked in a conventional home oven. It does have its limitations though. After it's cooked, you can never superheat it again or it will melt. It is, after all, an oil-based plastic material. I'm going to talk a little bit about how some of these sculptures were made. Here, as you can see, I have the Yoda head, this goofy looking frog, this cute teddy bear a student made a few years ago, a fully blossoming rose, and this human skull. You'll notice that on all these forms, with the exception of the rose, that they are hollowed out, rounded forms. I'm going to talk a little bit today how you can construct these forms, as well as apply a great amount of detail. First, let's talk about the clay itself. When you first get it out of the container, you'll notice that it's pretty crumbly. As you can see here, it doesn't have that easily moldable effect right out of the box. I went ahead and softened one of them up by mashing it over and over with my hand. I even used my elbow to depress the clay into a hard surface like a table. The reason I do this is because you want to make sure that the clay is very malleable or moldable before you begin a lot of work with it. This clay, while it is very durable, will take some time to get softened up. When you have it softened up to an appropriate degree, you'll notice that it'd be a lot more like a taffy kind of material where it'll stretch and be more traditionally clay-like. As I mentioned before, don't add water to soften up the clay. This is not that type of material. Water will just make the process more difficult. This is an oil base. So the best thing you can do is movement and the heat from your hands to soften the material. The first thing I want to talk about is making a pinch pot. It's pretty similar to what it sounds like. Pinch potting is a method they use to make a bowl-like form to create a hollowed out structure. I'm going to tear off a few pieces of clay for other parts of the structure, for example, if I were making the frog, and I'm going to soften them up. After they are softened to an appropriate degree, I'm then going to ball it up into what I call homemade hamburger patty. You know how you make hamburgers at home? They're kind of thick and fat and round. That's what I'm going for here. Next, I'm going to bend and rotate with my thumbs in the middle of that form. I will rotate this flat disc over and over again until it creates sort of an igloo shape. I'll repeat this process over and over, making sure to not let the clay material become too thin. If it becomes too thin, the likelihood of a hole punching or tearing is very high. After I have it looking more like a decent bowl shape, I'm going to pinch it closed with my hand. Now, traditional pinch potting is done like this over and over again with your thumb and the finger depressing the inside and the outside of the form. But because we're working with such a small amount of clay, I'm going to just go ahead and pinch it with my hands like this. Now, if I get a fold, that's okay. We'll smooth it out later. Next, I'm going to try to form this into a ball form. You might be asking why I would do that. Well, as I said before, I'm trying to make this cute frog critter, and he has two primary masses, the body and the head. Everything else is scored and attached. This will work as the structure for the head. I will pinch the hole closed, making sure to maintain the hollow interior. As you can see here, the clay has done a pretty good job of remaining hollow, and it looks kind of like a small ball or a tennis ball. Now I'm going to set that to the side. I'm going to take my remaining clay and repeat the same process. This is going to be for the other round form of the body. I'm quickly going to make that homemade hamburger patty shape. Then pinch pot it into position. Close up the bowl portion and form it into a ball. Now, don't fret if you're not as fast as me. I've been doing this for decades at this point. I've been using Sculpey since I was a little kid. But it can be pretty fast the more experience you can get. Next, you don't just place the clay on top and hope for the best. You want to make sure that you score it to make sure the two surfaces bond. What is scoring, you may ask? Well, I'm going to show you. If I just take the two forms and I push them together, the chances of them falling apart are very high. Scoring is this. You're going to take this clay material and you're literally going to rough up the edge with something like this, which is just a pointy wooden stick or dowel. You can also use things like a paper clip to do your scoring if need be. I'm going to score up the surface of the head and score up the surface of the body. This gives it rough surfaces to bond to, which is very useful to make sure an effective score happens. Then I'm going to depress the two forms together, making sure that they bond in the appropriate areas. After I'm done, I'm going to blend the two clay surfaces onto one mass. This will create the overall structure of my frog or elephant or whatever design I'm coming up with, as you can see here. Now, another thing I would also suggest is that whenever you have your two surfaces bonded, punch a hole all the way into the head cavity. We want to make sure that the air is able to escape when we heat it in an oven at home. Now we have the general structure of our frog design. To make attachments for things such as limbs or feet or eyeballs, I wouldn't fret about making those appendages hollow. What I would do, however, is mold them as a separate piece of clay from the leftover clump that I set to the side. And instead of just sticking them onto the surface, apply those same scoring methods to make sure they adhere to the structure. When you're done, blend them on to make sure that they bond appropriately. After the generic structure or the boring design is done for your teddy bear or your frog or whatever it is you're making, you can go ahead and start adding details such as eyes, noses, details on the feet, and so forth. This gives you a basic structure to work from that is not a solid mass of clay. You might be asking, well, what if I skip the hollowing out portion? You can, but because of the way this clay cooks, only the skin of it would get cooked all the way through, and the interior mass of the clay would stay soft because of the density of the clay. You might be saying, what's the big deal? Well, over time, the clay will break down much more rapidly if it's not cooked all the way through into a solid form. And painting clay that has not been cooked in Sculpey form isn't very useful. The clay won't adhere and it won't look very good even if it did. Now, while you can apply these methods of pinch potting and hollowing out the form to your frog or your bear or whatever it is you want, you can also use these same methods for the Yoda head. Let's say, for example, you have your generic ball shape and it's all hollowed out and you're proud of it. The best ball in the world, you might say, and it has a hollow form, as you can see here. If I was making the Yoda, it too has a hollow form. I would make attachments for things like the ears, not just by sticking them on, but again, apply those methods of scoring to make sure that they stick to the structure soundly. When you're done, feel free to add details such as the hollowed out ear cavity, cartilage, eyeballs, and so forth. Next, if you're applying these methods to something like the skull, you would be wise to follow the same tricks. Take this hollowed out form of your ball, and then take your pre-softened clay and mold on the attachments such as the jaw, nose, or eye sockets. One thing you're going to learn throughout this process is that this clay tends to wrinkle really well. There are a few ways to smooth this out, which I'll demonstrate real quick. You can take the clay and you can roll your dowel over the surface to smooth it out. You can also pet it and pat it with your fingertip. One thing you can't do is just rub it over and over and hope that it's not going to pill up. Pilling will occur, so patting and patting it over and over again is a great way to create a smooth out surface. Details like the wrinkles on this Yoda head or the structures of the eyeballs and so forth are carved out and sometimes rolled over the edge to smooth out the surface to minimize the pilling. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the rose. The rose is actually pretty easy compared to the other ones, but it still takes some concentration on the scoring methods. What you're going to do is take over your leftover clay and you're going to parse out how many petals you want over the entire structure. We've got at least 15 petals on this structure here. So I'm going to make 15 pieces of clay separated. Now, I would most definitely suggest that you put down a piece of cardboard or paper underneath the surface of your clay, because when you try to move it, chances are very high that it'll fall apart when you try to transport it, to cook it, or just store it while you're working on it. The best way to do this is to make a ball form out of your clay pieces that have been separated, depress them, and when they're flat enough, this is going to seem absurdly simple, you just pinch one end like that to create your petal form. You repeat this process over and over to create the entirety of your structure. Always work from the bottom of the structure, or the outermost petals, first. Then, as you get further and further closer to the middle of your structure, you can use less and less petals. Score slightly the areas from which the petals will connect with one another. Then depress them together. You will create a surface in a circular form utilizing this petal design. You will overlap it over and over, and on the last petal, instead of just pinching one corner of it, you will pinch 4 to create your centerpiece, as you can see here. So the rose is basically just repeating the process of creating petals and sticking them together through scoring. Thank you for your time. If you have any other experimental ideas, please feel free to share, and good luck.